Okay, let's begin. Welcome. Welcome everyone to session number 276 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. We are in the Manual for Teachers, and we are focusing on question number 27, which is, what is death? What is death? Let us begin. Paragraph 1. Death is the central dream from which all illusions stem. Is it not madness to think of life as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying in the end? We have asked this question before, but now we need to consider it more carefully. It is the one fixed, unchangeable belief of the world that all things in it are born to die. This is regarded as the way of nature, not to be raised to question, but to be accepted as the natural law of life. The cyclical, the changing and unsure, the undependable, the unsteady, waxing and waning in a certain way upon a certain path. All this is taken as the will of God, and no one asks if a benign creator could will this. Excuse me. So we never question it. We just take it for granted that this is the way it is. You know, that old saying that we have in the United States, anything, the only things that are certain are death and taxes. You take it for granted that everything dies. And this is when he says death is the central dream from which all illusions stem. He's not talking about the death of the body. He's talking about in the mind, in that moment when I presented myself with a choice between individuality and the oneness, right, between the ego thought system and the thought system of God, the will of God. Right? I chose to experience the individuality, which translates into the death of God and the death of my true self, although not in reality. But that's the way it was interpreted by me. All right? The original Son of God who turned his back on the oneness and now feels the guilt of having destroyed the oneness, having destroyed God, having destroyed your real self, although it didn't happen. Right? Once I choose that thought system of the ego, that thought is implanted in the mind. And so the Son of God tries to escape the mind and projects into this gigantic universe, right? And we wind up here in this world, and then that what you split off from, you forget. So there's the veil of forgetfulness. All right, and here we are, and we never question the fact that, well, this is the way it is. It's just the way it is. And death becomes the central dream. So the death of my true self, the death of God, the death of the oneness, is the central dream. And from that dream, everything comes, all the illusions come out, from which all illusions stem. All right? He says that was the beginning. And then boom, all these things and everything that we experience, that we walk through, that we look at, or that we sense, it's all illusory. Right? And you can't just say, oh, I don't believe it anymore. We have to work our way back. All right? So death is the central dream from which all these illusions come. He says, is it not madness to think of life as being, he says, isn't it crazy to think of life as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying in the end? He says, that's a little nutty to believe that that's life. All right, that's what all the people say. You're riding high in April, shut down in May. He says, we've asked this question before, but now we need to consider it more carefully. Because this idea of living in the body, you think that's life, right? It needs to be looked at because it's the one fixed, unchangeable belief of the world, right? That's what the world tries to teach us. That all things in it are born to die. Everything, you know, that wonderful passage from the Old Testament that was put to song in the 60s, to everything there's a season, right? And a time to every purpose, all right? And, you know, suggesting that there's a time to sow, a time to reap, a time to harvest. And that's, you know, that's like being born, living, and dying. Right? And then the next, after the harvest, is the next idea he'll present, which is the world's sense of devouring other things so that one can live. But let's not jump ahead. So this is regarded as the way of nature, that all things that are born will die. And it's not to be raised to question. All right? That's what the world keeps reinforcing on us. You don't question that. Look, just look around you. Everything that's born dies. So it keeps trying to prove to us that we are separated from the oneness, separated from the eternal. Right? And this is why we need to bring everything back into the mind, to the place in the mind that remembers, to that place in the mind that represents unconditional love and understanding, and have everything reinterpreted as we go along. So, because this is regarded as the way of nature, not to be raised to question, but to be accepted as the natural law of life. All right? So the cyclical, the changing, right? The unsure, the undependable and unsteady, the waxing and waning of a certain way upon a certain path. All this is taken as the will of God. All right? Because there's some religions that will tell you, well, that's the will of God. That's the way God wants it. And no one asks if a benign creator could will this. Could a benign creator will that everything dies? Right? Because think of the experience of things dying. There comes a lot of suffering, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain and misery for those of us who continue to, quote unquote, live. All right? I mean, what's flashing in my mind now is that even as little children, you watch them as their pets pass away, as certain things die, as their they grow older and their grandparents or their parents pass away, or their brothers and sisters. All right? They're the ones that start to ask, how could a nice God do this? How could a benign creator do this to me and my family? Right? A lot of people have just turned their back on any sense of an initial source, a God, for lack of a better word, right? A creator, because of these experiences. All right? I knew a man who, at a young age, let's say 25, his brother died. He loved his brother. And he had asked God to let my brother live, help him. So now, the rest of his life, he has no use for God, no use for any spirituality. Forget about it. I'll just live my life the way I want. I mean, he was a good man, but he just didn't want to hear it about God or anything. Because that God that was imprinted on him through this worldly experience was, he was fickle, to say the least. Right? So, he says, no one asks if a benign creator could do all this. In this perception of the universe, paragraph 2, in this perception of the universe as God created it, it would be impossible to think of him as loving. For who has decreed that all things pass away, ending in dust and disappointment and despair, can but be feared? He holds your little life in his hand, but by a thread, ready to break it off without regret or care. Perhaps today. Or if he waits, yet is the ending certain. Who loves such a God knows not of love, because he has denied that life is real. Death has become life's symbol. His world is now a battleground, where contradiction reigns and opposites make endless war. Where there is death, is peace impossible. Right. So where there is death, peace is impossible. Right. Especially when you go back to what we said in the beginning, where there is the death of the oneness, which doesn't happen, but we think it does. Then the turmoil begins. There's the guilt of having killed oneness. And then it's projected onto everything and everyone. How could there be peace when I'm saying, you're guilty? No, you're guilty. You're guilty. No, look, I'll prove it. Never ends. Never ends. And the world is now a battlefield. Right? So he says, in this perception of the universe, it'd be impossible to think of loving. God as loving. And these next couple of sentences reminds me when I was in college and I took a class where we were studying American literature, early American literature. All right. And we ran across sermons from the Puritans in New England. And this is almost word for word from a sermon. All right, this guy was telling you that God is like holding you on a string, above the fiery pits of hell, just ready to cut the string at any time, right? I mean, how could you be peaceful in that, with that picture in your mind, right? You're always waiting, always looking. And then, in that period of time, and that group of people, were also of the idea that God favored certain people. You know, if like, I guess if you were, industrious, as they call the Protestant work ethic, they used to call it, God would favor you. So they were always looking to see, am I being favored? That was nuts, all right? And believe me, things haven't changed, okay? That's just what it reminded me of. Where he says, for who has decreed that all things pass away, ending in dust and disappointment and despair, can be but feared. You have to fear a God like that. And then it says in sentence 3, paragraph 2, he holds your little life in his hand but by a thread, ready to break it off without regret or care. Perhaps today. And if he waits, no problem. The end is still certain. All right? So I racked my brain, which doesn't need much more racking, to see if I could remember the name of that preacher. He was an illustrious preacher in the Puritan communities. And this was one of his famous sermons. I don't know, his name might have been Edwards or something, but it doesn't matter really. But because this was drummed into people, right? The very same people who decided that certain people, especially women, were witches because some of the cattle were dying. And there was no science that would tell them, well, maybe it's this or that, or, No, they blamed it on the evil of, some women like the vivacious Bridget Bishop, right, who didn't want to hear their nonsense. Right? And that was the era of the Salem witch trials. Because how could there be peace when you're trying to appease God? So you're going to do horrible things to women, because you don't understand what they're doing, right? Or, they have certain flowers in their garden, right? And I believe Bridget Bishop actually had an early inn or a tavern in her house, which they probably hated. So, they had to find an excuse to blame her for something. But anyway, that's what it is. It's you believe that you've separated from the oneness, and you forget about the oneness. Now you're totally focused on the body and the bodies of other things, like cows, and you're off to the races. You're going through life like a pinball on a pinball machine. You have no idea where you're going, what you're bouncing off. You have no control of anything. And you have to be afraid. And you have to be afraid of the God who holds you on a little string. All right? Who loves such a God knows not of love. Because he has denied that life is real. He has denied that eternal life in the Spirit is real. Not this world of the flesh, of form. Right? We have denied who we really are, the eternal Spirit, and death has become life's symbol. Now it means you lived. Hey, you died. All those flowers were nice, but they died. Well, they lived. They start talking about, life cycles of different insects and what, Please, turtles. Right? Death has become life's symbol. And us, the Son of God, because we've turned our back on the oneness, we've killed off our true self, so we think, this world now is a battleground where contradiction reigns and opposites make endless war. Where there is death, is peace impossible. The opposites make endless war. Well, we have to have a war in order to get to peace. There has to be peace in the land. You know, now we have, I don't want to get into politics, but I mean specific politics, but you know, people, millions of people would agree with people that think that, well, these people have to be killed in order, in order to have peace. We have to have war against these people in order to be safe. That's just a mixed up world. It's a world that knows nothing of the true God. And meanwhile, they'll present themselves as, believing in something spiritual, whatever. Where there is death, is peace impossible. Right? In our experience of form and in our original belief that there was death, the death of the oneness. How could you have peace after that? And then in paragraph 3, he says, death is the symbol of the fear of God. His love is blotted out in the idea, which holds it from awareness, like a shield held up to obscure the sun. The grimness of the symbol is enough to show it cannot coexist with God. It holds an image of the Son of God in which he is laid to rest in devastation's arms, where worms wait to greet him, and to last a little while by his destruction. Yet the worms as well are doomed to be destroyed as certainly. And so do all things live because of death. Devouring is nature's law of life. God is insane, and fear alone is real. That's our experience here in form, in the world. Right? Devouring is nature's law of life. No matter how peaceful you want to be, all right, you still have to devour something in order to exist. Right? And it's nothing to be guilty of. You don't punish yourself for it. I mean, if you ingest some air, all right, there's all kinds of microbes or other stuff, living things, as science would point out, that we devour because we need to live. And you got to eat something in order to live. You have to eat, ingest, devour something. It doesn't make you bad, it just makes you part of this belief system. And you're not going to break away from it by fasting or anything. I mean, I don't want to be so adamant about it. Try it, but you don't want to go on any kind of a hunger strike or anything. Right? You may alter the way you eat, but it doesn't alter the fact that we believe we're here and something has to be devoured in order for me to exist. Whether it's a soybean or a chicken, something, So just don't blame yourself for anything, okay? Just question things. Right? Just start to question. Right? And you don't have to deprive you. It'd be silly to deprive yourself of food or oxygen or water. Right? That's just silly. As Jesus would say, it's an unworthy form of denial. Right? So you don't have to do that. You just start to question things. And you start to come inside, into the mind, to where your true nature resides. Right? That symbol of Jesus we use in the Course, the Holy Spirit. Right? The Holy Spirit has a lot of names. The bridge, the teacher, the messenger, The Holy Spirit is the memory of who you really are. So contact that memory. Get in touch. And start, just start questioning things. Because God becomes a symbol of fear. A God who's in control of your little life, as they say, can cut you off at any minute. You got to be afraid of approaching him. I don't even want to be seen. It's like my Latin teacher in high school. I don't even want him to look at me. He's going to call on me to translate Caesar's Gallic Wars or something. So if you didn't do your homework, you don't want him to look at you. Which really didn't work, but because he had a system. But that's the way we tend to look at God or any kind of a creator image. We're afraid because he's in charge. He's going to, he doesn't like what he sees. He's going to kill me. I happened to be in Grand Central Station last week, and I passed by a woman who was, asking people questions, and she stopped me. First thing she says to me, "Are you God-fearing?" And I said, "Well, not really." But I, explained to her why not in one or two sentences. But who needs to get into it? But But that's it. Are you God-fearing? And that's, they praise people. He's a God-fearing person. Come on. There's no need to be afraid of God. Right? Because God is not the avenger. Right? And it begins right away with the Adam and Eve story. God creates this wonderful Garden of Eden. Next thing you know, he's angry. And he's telling you, you're going to live the rest of your life in pain, you punk. I told you not to eat that fruit. All right? And then the blaming starts. No, it wasn't me, it was her. It doesn't matter. You both ate it. Get out. Don't come back. Now God becomes the avenger. Right? And that's the way we see, and that's what the ego wants. The ego never wants you to come to terms with God and not see him as an avenger. Right? The ego doesn't want you to go back into your mind. The ego wants you to stay transfixed on this body and other people's bodies and all the other forms that present themselves. That's what the ego wants us to be focused on. Don't go near your mind because the avenger is waiting for you. Right? He's going to turn you to stone, right, or whatever. And that's not the case. I relish the thought of when my niece was a young girl and she asked me about churches and God and everything, because she was experiencing, in my family there was a lot of different beliefs, and several anyway. And then she was singing in a choir of the Anglican Church in Manhattan, and she liked it because they allowed women to be the curators, the preachers, the pastors. Right? And I told her, don't worry about it. All the religions are saying the same thing, basically. Because the only thing you have to remember is that God is never angry. And I think that's a basic that children should be taught. God is never angry. What are you teaching them God is pissed off at you for? All right? God's going to get you for that. It's silly. It's beyond silly. It's actually destructive, but it basically is. Dr. Wapnick would just say it's just silly. We don't need to get angry at the people who are doing it either. All right? So death becomes a symbol of the fear of God. Right? And the problem is we believe what the ego is telling us. That's the problem. The problem is not what the ego is telling us, it's that we believe it. So question it. And no, you don't question it by yourself. You come in to that quiet space in your mind and you ask, help me to see this correctly. What's this all about? All right. Because otherwise we are part of this thought system that says it's one or the other. It's you or me, which was the original thought. It's me or God. It's me or the oneness. And I chose me. And here I am in a world of me or you. No matter how nice you make it look. You know? I mean, even, vicariously we take it out on sporting events. It's me or you. It's my team or your team. And we live it out. You see, people, apropos of the name fanatics, fans, they're really fanatical. They're living vicariously. And it's a world where it's me or you. And so do all things live because of death. Devouring is nature's law of life. And God is insane. And fear alone is real. Right? Any God that holds you dangling on a string is insane. Okay? Any God that you have to be afraid of is insane. Paragraph 4. The curious belief that there is a part of dying things that may go on apart from what will die does not proclaim a loving God, nor reestablish any grounds for trust. If death is real for anything, there is no life. Death denies life. But if there is reality in life, death is denied. No compromise in this is possible. There is either a God of fear or one of love. The world attempts 1,000 compromises and will attempt 1,000 more. Not one, can be acceptable to God's teachers, because not one could be acceptable to God. He did not make death because he did not make fear. Both are equally meaningless to him. So this idea of a creator, a God, whatever name it goes by in this world of form, is a creator of death. And God did not make death. God only recreated eternal life. Right? And it keeps on going, right? No matter what we believe, as the text says, you are at home in God. You are at home in the oneness, dreaming of this exile. Okay? And we go to our right mind, so to speak, and we ask our internal teachers, help me to get back to my true life. And we do that by asking, help me to see these things correctly. All right? And this is, because there's a curious belief that even after death, things go on. Like there's an afterlife or a reincarnation or bardos and, all those things. And still, that doesn't proclaim a loving God. All right? Because even with the Western world's Christian influence, the idea of an afterlife, there's still a punishing God. You can go to limbo, you can go to hell, you can go to purgatory, all different levels of suffering in the afterlife, because of what you did. All right? As Bob Dylan said, God knows when, but you're doing it again. All right? We were taught as children, in my experience, that you came to this existence with the mark of sin on you. So from the moment you can understand what they're telling you, you're afraid of God. And Jesus is telling you, come on, it's ridiculous. God is never angry. All right? And we have all these different systems of what happens to you after you die. Then he says in paragraph 4, sentence 2, if death is real for anything, there is no life. Right? So if death exists in anything, anywhere, it's not real life. But if there is reality in life, death is denied. So we try to contact reality in our mind when I go into my internal teachers. And I ask for things to be retranslated. I'm trying to contact that reality and bring it into life, into this experience. All right? He says, no compromise is possible. You can't have a little oneness in the separation. All right? We can have reflections of oneness, right, which gradually increase and bring us back to the oneness. But you can't live that way, and you can't exist that way here. You keep moving back and forth from the belief, the system of oneness and eternal spirit into the system of separation and separate interests and things. All right? He says in paragraph 4, sentence 6, these are the things that get said frequently during the text. Just different words. There is either a God of fear or one of love. All right? No two ways about it. And he says, and this world attempts 1,000 compromises and will attempt 1,000 more. But not one can be acceptable to God's teachers, because not one could be acceptable to God. He did not make death because he did not make fear. Both are equally meaningless to him. Both are equally meaningless. I believe it was Helen Schuckman was talking to Jesus in a private moment, so to speak. And she asked him, take away a fear of something or something like that. I forget the true story, the exact story, as it were. But he said, look, I can't take away your fear because I don't believe in it. He said, I don't believe in fear. All right. So whatever you're experiencing is the result of believing that you separated from the oneness. All right. So come back to the oneness. I mean, when we do that, we reinforce that by just sitting in the company of our internal teachers. Right? And the workbook is there to strengthen our mind, right? With daily exercises of returning to the mind for a moment. So paragraph 5, the reality, in quotes, the reality of death is firmly rooted in the belief that God's Son is a body. And if God created bodies, death would indeed be real. But God would not be loving. There is no point at which the contrast between the perception of the real world and that of the world of illusions becomes more sharply evident. Death is indeed the death of God, if he is love. So death, if we believe in death and the thought system of death, we believe that God is dead. And now, and if he is love, and now his own creations must stand in fear of him. Right? And this just repeats what we said about even like the Garden of Eden. And now his own creations must stand in fear of him. He's not father, but destroyer. He's not creator, but avenger. Terrible his thoughts, and fearful his image. To look on his own creations is to die. All right? To get close to love, the thoughts of love, that's God's creations, is to die. You get close to God, you're going to die. Right? So the reality of death is firmly rooted in the belief that God's Son is a body. I think this is me. This is who I am. And if God created bodies, which he didn't, death would indeed be real, but God would not be loving. He's repeating the ideas from the beginning of the section. Right? If God created things that live in form, he wouldn't be loving because all these things die. Now you got to be afraid of them. Who wants to die? Who wants to leave the party? All right. And now his own death is indeed the death of God, if he is love. And now his own creations must stand in fear of him. Right? He's not a father, but a destroyer. Not a creator, but an avenger. Right? To get too close to him is to die. This is what the world and the ego thought system wants to reinforce in us. Because if we eventually keep coming into that part of the mind that remembers the loving God, remembers the innocence, if the interest in this world of form decreases, and it will keep decreasing until it's gone, until there's no fear of losing it. And that's what the ego wants to prevent. The ego wants to keep itself going. Right? The ego thought system. Paragraph 6. And the last to be overcome will be death. Of course. Without the idea of death, there is no world. All dreams will end with this one. This is salvation's final goal, the end of all illusions. And in death are all illusions born. Repeating that. What can be born of death and still have life? And what is born of God, but what is born of God and still can die? These inconsistencies, the compromises and the rituals the world fosters in its vain attempts to cling to death, and yet to think love real, are mindless magic, ineffectual and meaningless. God is, and in him all created things must be eternal. Do you not see that otherwise he has an opposite, and fear would be as real as love? And the last to be overcome is this idea of death. Right? Because without the idea of death, there is no world. Right? Remember, without the idea of the death of oneness, the death of God, the death of your true self, there is no world. No need for it. All dreams will end with this one. Right? And this is salvation's final goal, the end of all illusions. Salvation, the escape from the ego thought system, the escape from the thought system of death. In death are all illusions born. All right? And here's a very salient point here, sentence 10, paragraph 6, worth repeating. God is, and in him all created things must be eternal. I mean, that's the bottom line truth. God is, and in him all created things must be eternal. You are part of that God, and you are eternal. This world of form is just some kind of a strange passion play, so to speak. All right? And we, piece by piece, have it reinterpreted until we get to the point where we can generalize and just say, oh yeah, this is silly. I want to go home. All right. So paragraph 7, he's going to finish with this. He says, teacher of God, your one assignment could be stated thus: accept no compromise in which death plays a part. Do not believe in cruelty, right? Nor let attack conceal the truth from you. What seems to die has but been misperceived and carried to illusion. Now it becomes your task to let the illusion be carried to the truth. Be steadfast but in this. Be not deceived by the reality of any changing form. Truth neither moves nor wavers nor sinks down to death and dissolution. And what is the end of death? Nothing but this: the realization that the Son of God is guiltless now and forever. Nothing but this. But do not let yourself forget. It is not less than this. Right? So he says, what is the end of death? He says, nothing but this. The realization of your own innocence. What we call the atonement principle. You never left the mind that thought of you. The realization that the Son of God is guiltless now and forever. Right. Nothing but this. And remember, it's nothing less than this. So we practice the process of forgiveness, which is being willing. First I notice I'm projecting guilt, and I don't want to do that anymore. It keeps me in this thought system of death. It just makes me miserable. So I ask, I'm willing to see the innocence of the person or the situation, right, or the circumstances. I'm willing. I go to my mind and I contact that part of my mind that remembers. All right. This is what he means by what seems to die, which is all these situations in the world. It's just been misperceived, so I need my perception corrected. Right? He says it has been misperceived and carried off into the illusion. Now it becomes your task to bring that illusion back, to let your illusion be carried to the truth. That's what he means. Bring the situation to your right mind and just ask, what is the truth? What is the truth of the situation? He says, be steadfast but in this. It's really all you got to do. Be steadfast in having your perceptions changed. Help me to see it differently. And be not deceived by the reality of any changing form. All right? Truth neither moves nor wavers nor sinks down to death and dissolution. The truth never wavers or changes. It's always the truth. And the truth we're trying to put across here is you never left the mind that thought of you. You're completely innocent as the moment you were thought of. All right? And what is the end of death? It's that realization that you are innocent. The realization that the Son of God is guiltless now and forever. Nothing but this. But do not let yourself forget. It is not less than this. This is everything. Is to remember your innocence. And we remember the process that we use to remember our innocence in this world is to bring everything to the right mind and be willing to see the innocence. Allow the other to be innocent. And let that awareness arise in your mind. Right? I'm willing to see the innocence, which is I'm willing to see the truth. Don't let the words get in the way. Right? Like he says, don't get bogged down in words and theology. All right? What we need is the experience. I need the experience of having my perception changed. And becoming aware of the innocence, becoming aware of the truth. Right? And that would be the end of death, the end of the ego thought system. And the end of death is the realization the Son of God is guiltless now and forever. Nothing but this. And do not let yourself forget, it is not less than this. Alrighty. Thank you for the opportunity. And I will see you in the next session. Thank you.